Am I the jerk for not letting my disabled cousin use my car, leading to a family fight? My cousin Jake, 32M, is more like a brother to me, 28F. We grew up together, and I've always adored him. Jake has been in a wheelchair since a car accident a decade ago left him paralyzed from the waist down. Despite everything, he's fiercely independent. He lives on his own and works part-time, and he's always tried not to let his disability define him. I admire that about him, and I've never seen him as anything but the fun, kind person he is. Because of our closeness, I think our family assumes I'd do anything for Jake at the drop of a hat. I have a car that I bought 2 years ago, a used but reliable SUV that I scrimped and saved for. It's nothing fancy, but it's mine. I need it to commute to work every day and run errands. Importantly, it's not modified for someone in a wheelchair to drive. Jake doesn't have a car of his own. He usually relies on accessible public transport or on his mom, my Aunt Karen, to drive him in her van, which is adapted for his wheelchair. He's also been learning to drive with hand controls at a driving school, but he doesn't have a full driver's license yet, just a learner's permit, I think. A couple of weeks ago, Jake had an important specialist doctor's appointment scheduled on a Monday morning. It was really vital for him. Something about new treatments or physical therapy options. He'd arranged for a transport service to take him, but that fell through at the last minute due to a driver shortage. Aunt Karen's van was in the shop for repairs that week, so she was in a bind about how to get him there. The night before the appointment, I got a call around 9 p.m. It was Aunt Karen, and she sounded stressed. She asked if I could do her a huge favor and either drive Jake to the appointment, which is an hour away in another city, or let him borrow my car so he could drive himself using his portable hand control kit. I was at home, exhausted from a long day at work, and I had an important meeting the next morning that I couldn't miss. Initially, I said I was really sorry, but I wouldn't be able to take him because of my work. I assumed that would be the end of it, because realistically, if I can't drive him, I didn't see how him using my car was an option. He's not fully licensed to drive by himself, and my car isn't outfitted with the permanent modifications he's used to. But Aunt Karen pressed on. She told me Jake has this temporary hand control device he can attach to drive any automatic car. I was skeptical. I'd never heard of that, and I wasn't comfortable with someone installing a device in my car and driving it without me there, license or not. She insisted it's safe and that he's driven with it many times with an instructor. I asked, is he even allowed to drive alone yet? She deflected, saying he's a great driver and just needs a vehicle. Then she dropped the guilt trip. You know how important this is for Jake. Don't you want to help him even a little? We're family. He'd do the same for you. My heart was pounding. I love Jake, and I want him to get to his appointment. But everything in me was screaming that this was a bad idea. I pictured him struggling if something went wrong on the road, or getting pulled over without a full license, or, God forbid, getting into an accident in my car. The idea made me feel sick with worry. Plus, I rely on my car heavily. If something happened to it, I'd be screwed for work. So I told my aunt as gently as I could that I wasn't comfortable letting anyone else drive my car, especially not on such short notice and under those conditions. I offered to pay for a ride share or taxi to take them there, or even help them try to reschedule the appointment, but she got really irritated. She said, taxis aren't wheelchair friendly and rescheduling will take months. You're seriously going to put your car above Jake's health? I started to explain that wasn't it, but she cut me off and said, fine, I see how it is, in the most disgusted tone, and hung up on me. I sat there after the call, feeling like the worst person alive. I even almost called back to say, okay, take the car, but I talked myself out of it. I reminded myself of all the reasons it made me uncomfortable and the alternatives that still existed. Maybe they could find an emergency medical transport in the morning, etc. I barely slept that night, though, racked with guilt. The next day, I texted Jake early, apologizing and saying I hoped he managed to get to the appointment. He didn't respond, which is unlike him. I went through my workday, distracted from that important meeting because I kept checking my phone. Nothing from Jake or my aunt. That evening, my phone blew up. First, my mom called, furious. Apparently, word had spread quickly through the family grapevine. My mom said Aunt Karen told her I refused to lift a finger to help and left Jake stranded, causing him to miss the appointment he'd been waiting months for. I was stunned. I asked if he really missed it. Mom said yes. They couldn't get a ride in time and had to cancel, and everyone was upset. I felt like absolute crap. Mom was yelling in my ear about how selfish I was and how could I do that to poor Jake. She said, he's your cousin, practically your brother, and you treat him like a burden. She also dropped that Dad was ashamed of me and that my grandparents were disappointed because family takes care of family. I was already guilt-ridden, but now I was also defensive. I tried to explain my side, but Mom wasn't having it. She said something like, there is no side. You had a chance to do a simple act of kindness, and you spit on it. I didn't raise you to be so self-centered. That hurt, especially because my parents did raise me to be generous, but also cautious and responsible. After hanging up with Mom, I just broke down and cried. Then I did something I probably shouldn't have. I went on our extended family's group chat, which was blowing up with messages I hadn't looked at yet, and basically unloaded. I texted a long message explaining that I didn't do this out of malice or indifference, that I was worried about the safety and logistics, and that I had offered alternatives. I wrote that I loved Jake and would never want to hurt him, but that I felt uncomfortable letting someone, even him, drive my car, especially when he technically isn't licensed to. I ended it saying I was sorry he missed the appointment, but it wasn't wholly my fault and the situation was sprung on me last minute when I had a work obligation. I thought maybe if they saw my reasoning, they'd understand or at least not think I was a monster. That did not go over well. Most of the family didn't respond directly, but the tone of the chat was clearly against me. My older cousin, Jake's older sister, wrote something like, "Wow, just say you don't care about him and go. Excuses, excuses." An aunt said, "This new generation is so individualistic. In our day, we drop everything for family." Someone else said I should be ashamed. A couple of relatives did send me private messages. One cousin told me she understood my concerns, but maybe I should have just taken the chance to help. Another said he knew Aunt Karen can be pushy and that he had a spare older car that he would lend to Jake for next time. That cousin, let's call him Rob, actually offered to drive Jake himself later in the week, but the appointment was already missed. The worst message was from Aunt Karen herself in the chat. She said I let everyone down and that she hoped my precious car was worth it. She added a sad face emoji, which somehow made it sting more. Then she left the group chat dramatically. I felt absolutely sick reading all of this. I called Jake multiple times that night to apologize directly and hear from him. He didn't pick up. I left a tearful voicemail. Still nothing. I was devastated, thinking I really hurt him. The very next day, my mom called and told me that Aunt Karen and some family wanted to have a face-to-face discussion at my grandparents' house. Basically an intervention. From the sound of it. I was hesitant. I felt like a lamb being led to slaughter, but I agreed because I wanted the chance to see Jake and apologize in person and maybe clear the air. That Sunday, I walked into my grandparents' living room, and it was like the air was thick with tension. My mom, dad, Aunt Karen, my uncle, Jake's dad, and my grandfather were all there. Jake was there too, sitting in his wheelchair, arms crossed, and looking down at the floor. No one even said hi to me when I walked in. It was dead silent. I managed a weak hello and got curt nods. Grandpa, who's usually the peacekeeper, said very sternly, "We need to talk about what happened on Monday." I started by saying how sorry I was that Jake missed his appointment and that it turned into such a mess. I was trying to keep my composure, but my voice was already shaking. I looked at Jake and said, "I am so sorry. I never wanted to let you down." Before Jake could respond, Aunt Karen launched in. She basically repeated the whole narrative that I was selfish and cared more about my car than about Jake's well-being. "You could have helped. You just chose not to," she snapped. I tried to interject that I did try to help in other ways, and that I had concerns about the driving situation. I barely got 2 sentences out before my uncle, who usually is quiet, suddenly barked out, "Bullshit. You just didn't want to be inconvenienced. How do you think Jake feels having to ask at all? You humiliated him." I remember physically recoiling, because my uncle is a big guy and he was red in the face, yelling. My own dad, who's Jake's godfather, said quietly, "We're very disappointed in you." That somehow cut even deeper because he wasn't yelling. The cold, low tone was worse. The thing is, with everyone piling on, I started to get defensive again. The guilt was fighting with a kind of anger rising in me. I said, with tears in my eyes, "I was thinking of safety too. I wasn't trying to be selfish. If something happened..." Aunt Karen cut me off, practically spitting her words. "What was going to happen, huh? You think he's some incapable child? He drives with those controls just fine. You think so little of him that you didn't trust him with your car?" I said, "It's not about thinking little of him. It's my car. I panicked about risking it, okay? Maybe that was selfish, but it was my gut feeling." I was openly crying by then. I turned to Jake, who still hadn't said anything, and pleaded, "Jake, please, you know I trust and respect you. I was just scared." Finally, Jake spoke, quietly and without looking up. "Scared of me driving, or just didn't care enough to try?" That hit me like a truck. "Of course I care. I care about you so much. That's why..." I stopped because I realized what I was about to say would sound bad. I was going to say that's why I worried about the worst-case scenario, but that implies I assumed he might crash or something. He looked up at me then, eyes shiny like he might cry too, and said, "You really let me down. I would never have done that to you." His voice was calm but trembling. At that, Aunt Karen put an arm around his shoulder like to comfort him and shot me the nastiest glare. My mom shook her head at me, and I just broke. I blurted out, I can't undo it. What do you want me to do? I can't change what happened. Grandpa told me, don't raise your voice. That was almost laughable because I was maybe slightly loud, but my uncle had just been yelling. Still, I realized there was 0 point to this meeting beyond shaming me. Jake had spoken his piece. He was disappointed and felt I let him down. Everyone else had decided I was guilty as charged. I just mumbled another apology, looking at Jake, and said, I really was only thinking of what could go wrong. I'm so sorry. He didn't respond, didn't even look at me that time. I left in tears. Not a single person followed me or said goodbye. In the days following that confrontation, I basically became a pariah. My parents barely spoke to me aside from terse, cold comments. I kept replaying everything in my head, second-guessing myself. On one hand, logically, I still felt like lending my car under those circumstances wasn't smart. It wasn't about not caring. It was about practical issues and, admittedly, my own anxieties. On the other hand, this was a medical appointment for someone I love, who is at a disadvantage in society because of his disability, and maybe I should have just sacrificed my comfort or schedule. If the roles were reversed and I needed help, wouldn't I want someone to go out of their way? I also thought about how independent Jake tries to be. Perhaps by saying no, I inadvertently made him feel even more helpless or humiliated. That thought killed me. I know he hates feeling like a burden. What if my refusal made him think I see him as one? That absolutely was not my intention. Amidst all this guilt and confusion, I hadn't heard much directly from Jake since that meeting. The family was speaking for him, but he's an adult. Maybe outside of their pressure he had a different take. We're normally close, so the silence was ominous. It was about a week after everything that I finally got a direct text from Jake. He only wrote, I'm really disappointed, that's it. I stared at those 3 words for what felt like an eternity. I didn't know how to respond. I tried calling him immediately after, but no answer again. So here I am, writing this out. My family is fractured, Jake is hurt and distant, and I'm the designated villain. I feel like no matter what I do now, I've already messed up beyond repair. I genuinely was trying to be responsible, not cruel. I love him. I just didn't love the idea of handing over my car under those conditions. Am I the asshole here? Should I have just sucked it up and let him take the car, or driven him myself? Meeting and job be damned. I'm torn because while I feel I had valid reasons, I also feel like a horrible person for the outcome. I really don't know. Any perspective is appreciated because I can't trust my own judgment right now. Update 1. First, I want to thank everyone who commented on my original post. It's been about 2 weeks since I shared my story, and reading the responses was eye-opening. The general consensus was a mixed bag but leaned towards not the asshole, with some people saying it was a tough situation overall. Many of you validated my concerns about safety and boundaries, while others pointed out how heartbroken Jake must have felt. Both sides were honestly fair. I took all of it to heart. Now on to what's happened since. After that family meeting at my grandparents', where I basically got verbally pummeled, I decided to give everyone some space. I stopped initiating contact, thinking maybe a little cooling off period would help. It was painful. I've never gone this long without talking to my parents or Jake. But every time I thought about reaching out, I remembered the wall of anger and disappointment I faced, and I hesitated. A few days after my post, something pretty unsettling happened. I came out to my car one morning to go to work and found the windshield cracked and a long scratch along the driver's side door. It looked like someone had keyed it viciously. I just stood there in shock, and then I absolutely lost it, sobbing in the driveway. It felt like the universe was punishing me. First I lose my family's respect because of this car, and now my car itself was literally vandalized. I have no enemies that I know of, and I live in a pretty quiet area. My mind immediately went to the worst possible conclusion, that someone in my family did this to teach me a lesson or out of spite. I don't want to believe any of them could go that far, but the scratch was clearly deliberate. The windshield crack. I'm not sure, maybe they hit it with something. I ended up taking photos and calling the police to file a report, but with no cameras and no witnesses, I don't expect much to come of it. What really broke me was later I noticed the scratch wasn't just random. It looked like it might have been letters. I swear I could make out part of an A and maybe an H. Maybe I'm imagining it, but it looked like someone tried to scratch the word asshole or AH into my door. If that's true, I have no words. That sent me spiraling emotionally. I called my mom after I calmed down to tell her what happened and also sort of feel out if anyone in the family might have done it. She was surprisingly quiet and just said, "That's terrible," in a flat tone. She sounded uneasy, but when I gently asked, "Do you have any idea? I mean, tensions are high, but I can't imagine," she cut me off with, "Don't go accusing family. Anyone could have done it." Then she said she had to go. I didn't accuse outright, But I did have suspicions. Jake's older sister, the one who snarked at me in the chat, lives just 2 streets over from me. We're not super close, and she was one of the most vocal about calling me out. Could she have? Or one of her hot-headed teenage kids, perhaps. Or maybe my uncle. But he's not the type to sneak around at night. Honestly, this line of thought made me feel sick, so I eventually tried to drop it. I got the car into a shop to replace the windshield and buff out the scratch as much as possible. It's cosmetic damage mostly, but it just felt so violating. My car used to be something I was proud of, and now every time I look at it I feel anger and dread. That incident actually made me withdraw even more. I didn't even want to go outside much for a couple days, worried about who might be lurking with ill intent. I took a few days off work, told my boss I had a family emergency, which wasn't far from the truth emotionally. During that time, one of my cousins, Rob, the one who had privately messaged me support, reached out again to check on me. We ended up meeting for coffee. Rob said that Aunt Karen and a few others were still bad-mouthing me at every opportunity. Apparently at a small family get-together, one I wasn't invited to, obviously, the topic of the missed appointment and Cargate came up again. When Rob tried to gently suggest that everyone ease up because I had my reasons, and surely I wasn't out to hurt Jake, Aunt Karen snapped that I only doubled down with that ridiculous text, and that I'm obviously not sorry since I haven't attempted to make it right. Make it right? I'm not sure what she expects me to do at this point. I can't turn back time. Rob also told me that Jake was mostly quiet during that conversation, but at one point he said, "It doesn't matter anymore. I know where my name stands." According to Rob, that made my mom cry and say something about how she failed as a mother, and Aunt Karen just consoled my mom, saying I'd see the light eventually. So yeah, that hurt like hell to hear. It's like they're waiting for me to have some grand epiphany and beg for forgiveness. After coffee with Rob, I was emotionally exhausted but grateful he filled me in. It's clear the family rift is not healing on its own. If anything, it's calcifying, them on one side, me on the other, with Rob kind of in the middle trying to mediate. The stress of all this was really getting to me. I barely slept, and I guess I wasn't as on top of things as usual because I messed up a major project at work. Sent an email with wrong data to a client. My boss had to do damage control. I was hanging by a thread. Then came the phone call that truly changed everything, and not in a good way. Late one night, around 11 p.m., I got a call from an unknown number. I normally don't answer unknown calls, but something told me to pick up. It was a hospital about 40 minutes away, calling to inform me that my cousin Jake had been admitted following an accident. The moment I heard that, my heart jumped into my throat. The nurse said he was in stable condition, but had suffered a broken leg and some minor injuries. I was listed as his emergency contact. I later found out Aunt Karen was unreachable at that moment because her phone died, and I was next on his contact list, which surprised me given everything. I didn't have many details, just that he had been struck by a car while on his wheelchair near a busy intersection. I felt immediate panic and guilt-fueled nausea. I thanked the caller, hung up, and without a second thought I grabbed my keys and drove straight to the hospital. Update 2. I raced to the hospital, my mind spinning with worst-case scenarios. By the time I got there, I was shaking. I found Jake's room in the ER, and to my immense relief, he was awake and talking quietly with a nurse. He had some cuts on his forehead, a nasty bruise on his cheek, and his left leg was in a temporary cast/splint. Seeing him banged up like that broke something in me. I started crying as soon as I saw him. "Jake," I managed to choke out as I went to his bedside. He looked at me, clearly a bit dazed on pain meds. "Hey," he said softly. I immediately started apologizing, even though none of this was directly my fault. I just felt so guilty for everything leading up to it. I was babbling things like, "I'm so sorry this happened to you. Are you okay? What do you need? I'm here. He was surprisingly calm. He said, "I'm okay. It could have been worse." He explained that he had been out with a friend earlier in the evening and was heading back home on his wheelchair when a car took a turn too fast and clipped him in the crosswalk. The driver actually stopped and called 911, so at least it wasn't a hit and run. I nodded, tears still streaming, and I just kept saying how glad I was that he was alive and relatively okay. About 20 minutes later, Aunt Karen and my uncle rushed in, followed by my parents. Apparently once the hospital got a hold of Aunt Karen, they all scrambled to get there. The moment Aunt Karen saw me at Jake's bedside holding his hand, her face contorted with rage. "What are you doing here?" she snapped. "Haven't you done enough?" I stepped back, feeling my stomach drop. I came as soon as I heard. I was listed as his emergency contact, I said quietly. That detail seemed to take her by surprise, and she shot a confused look at Jake. He mumbled, "I forgot to change it." I guess before all this, he had me as a contact. That made me want to both smile and cry. "Well, we're here now," Aunt Karen said in a clipped tone. She moved between me and Jake, practically shouldering me aside to fuss over him. My uncle nodded at me but didn't say anything. My parents hung back by the door. Mom was crying at seeing Jake hurt, Dad looking grim. The doctor came in and gave the rundown. Broken leg, some lacerations, possible concussions, so they want to keep him overnight. Overall, he'd recover, but the accident really shook him up. And obviously the leg is a big setback for someone wheelchair-bound. It's going to complicate his transfers and such for a while. As the doctor talked, I stepped back out of the immediate family huddle, not sure where I stood. After the doctor left, there was this awkward silence. My mom finally walked over and gave me a hug, the first hug I've had from her in weeks. She was crying and said, "This is so awful." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Dad patted my shoulder, which for him is equivalent to an emotional outburst. Aunt Karen, however, wasted no time in indirectly blaming me. She said to the room, but clearly meant for me to hear. All this stress. No wonder he wasn't himself. If certain people hadn't upset him so much recently, maybe things would be different. I bit my tongue, but my dad actually frowned and said, "Karen, the accident was caused by a careless driver. Let's not do this." This shocked me. My dad basically defending me? Aunt Karen just pursed her lips and went back to doting on Jake. Jake, for his part, seemed tired and uncomfortable with the tension. He finally addressed us all. "I'm okay, guys. It was an accident. Can you not fight, please?" Visiting hours were almost over, so the nurse said we should let him rest. Before we all dispersed, I quietly asked Jake if I could come by tomorrow when he's feeling better. He gave a tiny nod and said, "Yeah, okay." That night I barely slept, replaying Aunt Karen's snide remark and also just the image of Jake hurt. In the morning, I decided, regardless of what anyone thought, I needed to talk to Jake one-on-one. So later that day, I went back to the hospital. This time I timed it so Aunt Karen and my uncle were out grabbing lunch. I knew my parents were at work. In his room it was just Jake, lying there watching some daytime TV, looking bored and a bit down. I came in quietly. "Hey, it's just me." He gave a half smile. "Hey." I sat next to his bed, and for a second we just looked at each other. Then I just poured my heart out. I told him how terrified I was when I got the call, how it made me realize I can't bear something bad happening to him, how I'm so sorry for everything, missing the appointment, the fight, all of it. My voice cracked as I admitted, I was trying to do the right thing in a weird way, but I ended up doing the wrong thing by you. I am so sorry, Jake. He had tears in his eyes and said, "I'm sorry too. I know this whole thing blew up more than either of us wanted." He explained that he was really hurt and angry initially, mostly because he felt kind of humiliated to have to beg for help and then be refused. It made him feel like maybe I did see him as a burden or incapable. I frantically shook my head and said, "Never. I've never thought of you that way. I was being overly cautious because I care about you, and also, honestly, because I was scared for my car and my own responsibilities. I'm ashamed about that part." He sighed and admitted that after thinking about it, he understood my concerns a bit more. He knows how much I need my car and that the situation wasn't ideal. "I just wish you had handled it differently. It really hurt," he said quietly. That made me start crying again. "I know, I wish I had too. I was an idiot," I responded. We held each other's hand for a moment. It wasn't like everything was magically fixed. I could still feel the emotional distance, but it was the first real, honest conversation we'd had since this happened. I asked him what I could do to make it up, and he shook his head and said, "Just give me some time. And maybe don't give up on me, on us being okay again." I promised I wouldn't give up if he wouldn't. He actually cracked a tiny smile and said, "I won't." Right then, of course, Aunt Karen returned. She looked displeased to see me, and even more displeased that Jake and I looked like we'd been crying together. She didn't say anything in front of Jake, though, except to Kurt. "Oh, you're here." I said I was just leaving and would check in later. Jake gave me a little wave, and I left. That was a few days ago. Jake is home now, and I've been texting him every day, just light stuff like memes and inside jokes, nothing heavy. Sometimes he replies with an emoji or a short response, sometimes not. But I know he's reading them. It feels like we'll be okay eventually, at least we are trying. As for the rest of the family, that's still a mess. My relationship with my parents is slowly thawing. They actually invited me over for dinner yesterday, and while it was a bit strained, my mom hugged me when I left and said, "Love you." So there's that. However, Aunt Karen still basically hates my guts. She's made it clear I'm not welcome to visit Jake when she's around. I think she's afraid I'll undo whatever narrative she's built, where I'm the villain. Some other relatives are following her lead, while a few, like Rob, are firmly in neutral/make-peace mode. I have no idea how holidays or future gatherings will go. Honestly, I'm exhausted. This whole thing has taken so much out of me. Part of me wants to just skip Christmas with the family this year to avoid the drama. Part of me hopes by then it'll blow over. But knowing my aunt, she can hold a grudge forever.